My name is Daniel Carter. I'm 31, and I've made a lot of mistakes in my life, but nothing compares to the one I'm about to tell you. This is the story I've never told anyone. I call it, I was trimming her hedges when she whispered, "You're driving me crazy." It was a late spring afternoon in Brighton, the kind where the air is warm but carries the faint bite of the sea. I was halfway through a landscaping job on the north side of town. My small business, Carter & Sons, was supposed to be a family operation, but the & Sons part was just branding. I had no wife, no kids, no sons. Just me and my tools. The house belonged to a Mrs. Charlotte Hughes. She was in her mid-30s, recently divorced, with a kind of beauty that wasn't loud but disarming. The kind that made you look twice and then find yourself still thinking about her days later. Her dark hair was always pulled back loosely, like she'd done it in a hurry, and she had these eyes, gray, almost stormy, that seemed to notice more than you wanted them to. I had been working for her for about 3 weeks. She'd hired me to clean up her overgrown garden, but it wasn't just the work keeping me coming back. She had this warmth, the kind you don't see much anymore. She'd bring me iced tea, ask about my day, listen in a way that felt dangerous for a man who'd been lonely too long. That afternoon, I was trimming the hedges along her front walk. The rhythmic snip of the blades and the hum of traffic in the distance almost lulled me, until I heard her voice behind me. "You're driving me crazy." The words were low, almost a whisper. I froze, she froze, and for a long second, neither of us moved. When I turned, she was leaning on the wooden porch railing, a small smile playing at the corner of her mouth. But it wasn't just a smile. It was a challenge. I didn't know whether to laugh it off or ask her what she meant. "Sorry," I said, trying to sound casual even as my chest tightened. She tilted her head. "You've got a way of making things look better than they are." I knew she wasn't talking about the hedges. Over the next few days, her words stayed in my head. I told myself she was just being friendly, flirty in a harmless, divorced woman finding her confidence kind of way. But the more I thought about it, the more I realized I was starting to wait for her to be outside when I arrived. I trimmed slower when she talked to me. I started noticing little things. The way she tucked a strand of hair behind her ear, how she bit her lower lip when she was thinking. It should have been simple. Do the job, get paid, move on. But it wasn't. One Thursday, she asked me to fix the stone pathway in her backyard. The work took me closer to the house than usual, right near the kitchen windows. At one point, I heard raised voices from inside. A man's voice, sharp and cold, followed by hers, tight and defensive. I didn't want to listen, but I did. "You can't just turn up here whenever you want, Mark," she said. "You don't get to tell me when I can see my son." The man snapped back. There was silence, then the sound of glass clinking. My hands tightened around the trowel. I wanted to walk away, pretend I'd heard nothing, but instead, I caught myself looking toward the back door, half expecting him to come out. He didn't, but a few minutes later, she did. Her eyes were red. "Sorry," she murmured, brushing past me. "It's complicated." I didn't ask questions, but in that moment, something shifted in me, not just attraction, but protectiveness. And that was dangerous. The next week, she asked if I could come by on Sunday morning. It was unusual. I never worked Sundays, but she said it was important. When I arrived, the sky was heavy with clouds. She met me at the gate, wearing a soft cream sweater and jeans. No makeup, hair down. "There's something I want to show you," she said. She led me around the side of the house, into a section of the garden I'd never worked on. Overgrown roses tangled with ivy along an old trellis, and there was a rusted swing chair tucked into the corner. "This was my favorite place when I first moved here," she said softly. "Mark never liked it. He said it was useless space." I could see her hands trembling slightly as she reached for a branch. "I want it back. I want me back." Something in my chest pulled tight. "I can do that," I told her. Her eyes met mine, and for a moment, neither of us looked away. It wasn't the kind of gaze you give a contractor. It was the kind you give someone you've been thinking about in ways you probably shouldn't. The first raindrop hit my cheek before I realized how close we were standing. She smiled. Not her polite smile, but something softer, almost sad, and stepped back. "I'll make us coffee," she said, disappearing inside. That night I couldn't sleep. I kept replaying that moment in the garden. The way the air felt between us, thick with something unsaid. But the next morning, things got complicated. Because my younger brother, Ethan, called me out of the blue. "Dan, you're not gonna believe this," he said. "I've been seeing this woman for a couple of weeks. Lives in Brighton, near the coast. Her name's Charlotte." My blood ran cold. I sat there, phone pressed to my ear, trying to keep my voice even. "Charlotte Hughes." Ethan chuckled, oblivious. "Yeah. How'd you know?" I swallowed hard. "Lucky guess." The truth was, my mind was already spinning. Ethan wasn't a bad guy, but he was reckless. Charming in that careless way that drew women in before they realized he wasn't built for long-term anything. And here he was, entangled with the same woman who had just been staring at me in the rain like I was the only man in her world. That night I couldn't eat, couldn't think straight. Every memory of Charlotte, the coffee she made me, the way her hand had brushed mine when she passed me tools, now felt tainted. But it wasn't just jealousy. It was dread. If Ethan hurt her... Sunday evening, I drove past her house. I told myself it was to pick up my forgotten gloves. But that was a lie. There was a car parked out front, Ethan's. Through the partially drawn curtains, I saw them. They were sitting at her kitchen table. She was laughing, but it was a polite laugh, the kind you use when you're trying not to show discomfort. I should have left. Instead, I sat there in my truck until Ethan came out, hands in his pockets, grinning to himself. He didn't see me. The next morning, she called me. Her voice was steady, but I could tell something was off. "Dan, can you come by today? It's about the back garden." When I arrived, she was already outside, pruning dead branches. "You didn't tell me you knew Ethan," she said quietly. I rubbed the back of my neck. "Didn't know until yesterday." She gave a small, humorless smile. "He told me you were his brother. Said you'd probably warn him off me." The way she said it, half accusation, half invitation, made my chest ache. "I'm not here to judge you," I said. "I just don't want to see you get hurt." She set down the pruning shears, stepping closer. "And if I said the same about you?" For a second, the world seemed to shrink down to just her eyes on mine. But then she stepped back, almost like she'd caught herself. "I can handle myself, Dan." That week, Ethan called again. "She's different, man," he said. "I'm thinking about, something serious." I almost laughed. Ethan didn't do serious. But the thought of him making promises to her, promises he couldn't keep, made my stomach knot. "Just be careful," I said. 2 nights later, I got a text from Charlotte. "Can you come over? Now, please." The urgency in those 3 words had me in my truck before I even thought it through. When she opened the door, she looked shaken. "He came over. Drunk," she said, voice trembling. "Not Ethan. Mark." I glanced past her into the hallway. "Where is he now?" "Gone." But he said things that scared me. Her hands were cold when I took them. I wanted to tell her she was safe now, but the truth was, I wasn't sure of anything. That night, I stayed on her couch. Not because anything happened, it didn't, but because she didn't want to be alone. We talked until nearly dawn, about her marriage, about how Mark had a temper, about how she'd thought Ethan might be a distraction from all of it. At one point, she looked at me and said, "You don't look at me like I'm a problem you need to fix. You look at me like I'm me." I didn't know what to say, so I didn't. In the days that followed, the tension became unbearable. I was in her garden every other day, working while Ethan's name kept slipping into conversation. She never spoke about him like a lover, more like a complication. Then one Thursday evening, Ethan showed up while I was packing my tools. "Hey, big brother," he said, slapping my shoulder. "Didn't know you were working late here." Charlotte came out onto the porch, arms folded. Ethan gave her that same careless grin. "I was just leaving," I muttered, but as I walked past him, he leaned in. She's not yours, Dan. Don't get ideas. I wish I could say I ignored him. I wish I could say I walked away and never looked back. But the truth? That night, Charlotte texted me again. I need to tell you something. About Ethan. About me. I drove to her house in silence, my mind a storm. The text had been simple, but the weight behind it was heavy enough to make my hands tremble on the wheel. When I arrived, Charlotte was waiting at the gate. Not with her usual soft smile, not with her teasing charm, just a tight-lipped seriousness that made my chest ache. "Come inside," she said. We walked past the garden, past the swing and the trellis, into the living room. The air smelled faintly of coffee and wet earth, like the morning after a storm. She motioned for me to sit, but I didn't. I stayed near the doorway, sensing the tension thickening with every heartbeat. She took a deep breath. "Dan, Ethan isn't who he says he is. Or maybe he doesn't even know who he is." My stomach tightened. "What do you mean?" She looked at me with those stormy gray eyes I'd come to trust more than anyone else's. "He lied to me about a lot of things. His job, his living situation, even his ex. He has a way of making people think they're in control, but he's dangerous, Daniel. Dangerous." The word cut through me like ice. "And you?" I asked softly. "Where do I fit into this?" She hesitated. Her hands fidgeted with the edge of her sweater. I trust you. More than I should. That's why I'm telling you everything. You're different. I don't know why, but you're not like him. You're not like anyone I've met in years." I didn't move. Couldn't move. There was something in the air. The kind of silence that could explode or melt into confession. Finally, she stepped closer. I think I'm falling for you, Daniel." The words hit me harder than I expected. Falling for me. She was beautiful, brilliant, complex, and she was telling me that she trusted me with her heart. I started, but my voice cracked. She put a finger on my lips. "Don't say anything yet. Just let me finish." She told me everything about Ethan. How he'd been manipulative, how he tried to turn her against friends and family, how he had moments of charm so intoxicating that she almost forgot the fear he sometimes inspired. "And I didn't want to believe it," she whispered. "I didn't want to see it. But now I know the truth." She looked down, then back up at me. "I don't want him in my life anymore. I want someone real. Someone who actually cares. Someone like you." I swallowed, trying to steady myself. My mind raced. Ethan was my brother. Blood. My responsibility. But Charlotte was something else entirely. Something fragile and beautiful and dangerously tempting. I didn't have to choose immediately. Couldn't. But the look in her eyes, the trust she was placing in me, made the decision feel inevitable. That night, I stayed in the garden, alone. I sat on the swing she loved, listening to the faint rustle of the hedges, replaying every moment I'd spent there. Every smile, every word, every dangerous pull in her voice. And then I realized I was already in too deep. The next day brought confrontation. Ethan showed up at my workshop, furious and accusing. "Don't you dare take her from me," he shouted. "Ethan, she's not yours to take," I said firmly, though my chest pounded. "She is. You don't know her like I do." I stepped closer, voice low and controlled. "I do know her, and I won't let you hurt her anymore. Not for me, not for you. She's done with your games." The look on his face was pure rage, and, somewhere underneath, fear. Weeks passed. Charlotte and I started spending more time together. We laughed, argued, and healed in ways that felt reckless but necessary. There were moments of tension, moments when Ethan tried to manipulate or guilt us, but Charlotte and I stood firm. I learned things about her I never expected. Her quiet love for painting, the letters she wrote to herself that she never sent, the way she protected the memories of her son while letting go of the bitterness of her divorce. And then one evening, as we trimmed the last of the overgrown roses together, she whispered something I'll never forget. "You're driving me crazy," she said, smiling through the tears that had formed. This time I didn't freeze. I didn't pull away. I leaned in, pressed my forehead to hers, and whispered back, And you're the only one who ever made me feel alive again. It wasn't perfect. It wasn't safe. But it was real. And after all the lies, the threats, and the fear, real was all that mattered. By the end of that summer, Ethan had left Brighton. We never spoke again. Charlotte and I rebuilt her garden and, slowly, our lives. The garden became more than a project. It became our sanctuary, a place of laughter, secrets, and trust. A place where love didn't feel like a gamble, but a quiet certainty. And every time I see those hedges, perfectly trimmed, those roses climbing just right, I remember the day she whispered, "You're driving me crazy," not because she annoyed me, but because she changed me. She taught me that love isn't safe, it isn't easy, and it isn't always fair. But when it's real, it's worth every risk, every fear, and every heartbreak that comes before it. Years have passed since that summer. The garden is still there, thriving, like a living memory of everything we survived and everything we dared to feel. Charlotte and I never took our love for granted. Every argument, every laugh, every quiet moment under the sun reminded us how fragile and fierce life can be. I often think back to that day I first heard her whisper, "You're driving me crazy." I was trimming hedges, thinking the work was all that mattered. But she taught me something I hadn't realized. That love, like a garden, needs attention, patience, and courage. Life isn't about avoiding the thorns. It's about learning to hold hands through the sharp ones, to forgive the storms, and to celebrate the blooms. Charlotte and I faced storms, family conflicts, past lovers, and the shadows of fear and doubt. But in facing them, we found depth and intimacy I didn't think was possible. Sometimes I wonder how different my life might have been if I had walked away when I first learned about Ethan. If I had listened only to caution. But love isn't about caution. It's about daring. I learned that day, in that garden, with the scent of roses around us and the storm clouds breaking above, that the heart doesn't belong to logic or bloodlines alone. It belongs to moments of trust, to the courage to face danger, and to the willingness to be utterly, vulnerably human. And if there's one truth I carry now, it's this: the people who make your heart ache, who push your boundaries, who challenge you and scare you, they are often the ones who remind you what it means to truly live. Charlotte whispered it first, and I'll whisper it to anyone brave enough to listen. Love is never simple, but it is always worth it.